Hello, welcome back to Romania, and thank you for allowing us to have this interview. It's been more than a year, as you said, since you last came to Romania.
Since we last had an interview, I was in Romania in January.
Do you think the situation changed for the best or for the worst in the meantime?
I think that when we look at the situation right now, we see several developments that give us that look good to us. We see inflation that was really high last year, peaking in November, is on a clear downward path now with the tightening by the National Bank of Romania. We see the presentation recently of the fiscal package by the government, which we believe is a step in the right direction in order to help lower the fiscal deficit. It's not enough, but it is a step in the right direction. So we do see good signs. I would also mention the ongoing implementation of the National Recovery and Resilience Plan, which includes a series of milestones to be adopted that are all, or many of which are really important reforms for the Romanian economy, and that they are then accompanied by investments supported financially by the European Union. So we see several developments, several trends that to us look good.
You mentioned the fiscal package, which is a very hot topic in Romania these days, and you said it's a step further, a step in the right direction. What would the whole trip be?
The fiscal deficit in Romania is too high. This year we project it to be about 6% of GDP. And with the fiscal package, we expect it to come down to about 5% of GDP next year. That is still too high. The deficit that would put the debt burden of Romania on a stable path would have to be no more than 3% of GDP. So after this package, there's still another 2% of GDP in adjustment to be achieved. So it's a step in the right direction, but more steps should come after this one. And we have discussed how that can be done, and we do see quite a few options for further fiscal adjustment, in particular on the side of tax revenues. The tax system of Romania is still rather complex, has still quite a few exemptions and special privileges for certain groups that can be addressed, that can be resolved, and doing so would make the tax system more simple, more fair, and would result in more revenues that help reduce the fiscal deficit.
Adding new tax would be an option? Or increasing tax?
Increasing a tax is a very simple way of reducing the fiscal deficit. What we see is that there are better options to use first. I mentioned the reduction of loopholes and privileges, etc., making the system more simple. Another one is to implement a reformed property tax. There is also the possibility within the VAT to look if there's more items that can be brought from a lower bracket to a higher bracket.
Increasing the general VAT would be an option?
In theory, every tax can be increased, but what we are looking for are options that we think are good options in that they would increase revenues, but do so in a way that make the tax system fairer, and that also are putting the least burden on economic growth. So we're looking for what we think are the best options first. We see still quite a few of those options that can be implemented that we have discussed, and we would say that more general, simple tax increases would only be a last resort if you don't achieve the targets with better options. So we are not advising those at this stage, no.
Expenses clearly overwhelm the income. in Romania, in the state budget. But how would Romania collect more?
Mm-hmm. So we discussed just now changing the tax system, but in addition, another part of getting more revenues is collecting better.
Exactly, that's what I was trying
That's
to...
also an important part of the reforms. Of course, that is under the direction of ANAF. ANAF is working on a number of reforms, quite a large number of reforms. The IMF is also giving assistance to ANAF to help them with that. What we see now is that many reforms are underway, but a lot needs to be completed. In particular, the various separate reforms need to work together. For example, you can implement a new cash register, or you can require companies to do their invoices electronically. That gives a lot of information to the tax system, but then until the tax system has a way of using that information to find out if someone is not paying what they are supposed to pay, and can follow up with a tax audit to resolve that, until that point you don't really get an improvement in tax collection. So that's where we are now. Reforms are underway, but they are not yet resulting in increased revenues. More needs to be done, in particular when it comes to digitalization of ANAF, to make the reforms actually effective. So that is work in progress. That is still to be done. It's a priority of the government, and rightly so.
Recently, the finance minister stated that the budgetary deficit might lead to a severe situation, and a loan from the IMF is not excluded. Do you see that in the future as possible, a loan from the IMF?
Every member state of the IMF can always ask for financial assistance, but in the case of Romania, we do not see such a need. We're also not projecting that there will be such a need, and we did not discuss it with the authorities.
Regarding the administrative reform, I'm sure you've seen the numbers and the measures that the government wants to take. How do you see the whole image? Is Romania a state with a bigger than needed administrative body?
When we look at the size of the government in Romania, and we compare it with other countries in the European Union, what stands out is not that the Romanian government is bigger. What stands out is that the revenues of the Romanian government are lower. And as a result, the deficit of the Romanian government is higher. So that's one reason why we first look at revenues when it comes to finding a solution for this. Of course, you also need to look at expenditures. You need to make sure that the money that is spent by the government is spent efficiently. You need to look at waste in the government and resolve that. So that's why we very much support expenditure reviews, which is an exercise to find ways of increasing efficiency. We think that is very important. At the same time, we are not counting on reductions in spending as the main part of the solution for the fiscal problem of Romania, and that is because, first, reducing waste in the government, increasing efficiency is easily said, but not so easily done. This is not just here, that is across the world. It means reorganizing institutions. That is not just switching, something you switch on or off. That is difficult to do. Secondly, Romania also still has a number of areas where there are real spending needs for the government. For example, when it comes to education, the education system in Romania still is well below the standards of Europe. Healthcare also. In infrastructure, there's a lot more to be done. A lot is happening right now, but there's more to be done still. Also other areas, for example, child poverty is high in Romania. So we see a lot of areas where there are still real justified needs for the government to spend. So we expect that even though it's possible to reduce waste in the government, if we look at spending as a whole, we cannot count on that to resolve the fiscal problem.
Does the government actually waste money?
Every organization always needs to look for ways to be more efficient, and that is certainly true for a government. The government uses the taxpayers' money, and the taxpayers deserve value for money. So the government should be looking at ways to be more efficient, should be looking at ways to reduce waste. That is true in Romania, that is true in every other country. So we are very supportive of actions to make that happen.
In May last year, when you came here for the same reason, you were recommending eliminating some facilities, like subsidizing electric bills, for example. It did not happen. How do you see that?
What we were recommending last year was to phase out the system through which the government is capping the price of electricity. What is happening is that the system is planned to be phased out, but a bit later than we had recommended. In the meantime, prices are coming down, and therefore this system has less of an impact than it would have with higher prices in the market. So we emphasize that issue less right now because it is less of an immediate problem right now. Instead, we are emphasizing other areas. I mentioned the need for continuing the reform of the tax system.
What would be three main painful points that you would address in the next months if you were, I don't know, the government of Romania?
Obviously, we are not the government of Romania. We are not in a position to make those choices. We give advice to the government, and we try to give advice that would help them resolve some of the key problems. When it comes to the fiscal deficit, which we think is the most challenging problem for the government right now, our advice is to first implement the fiscal package, to then go further with more reforms to make the tax system more clean, more fair, and more productive. And in the meantime, continue with the implementation of the milestones under the European Union's NRRP, the Recovery and Resilience Plan, which involves some very challenging reforms. I think of reforms of the pension system, of the wage system, the monitoring of state-owned enterprises, reforms that are all important for the public finances, but not only for the public finances, that are important for people directly and for the efficiency of the whole Romanian economy.
Regarding the deficit, one of the reasons that experts think the deficit is higher than it should be is that the budget was built on false premises. Overstated income provisions and understated expenditure provisions. Is that something you have noticed?
When it comes to planning a budget, and especially planning the revenues of the budget, we always favor being conservative, being cautious. The reason is that you hope to avoid a situation where you have to make cuts in the budget in the middle of the year. That is easy advice in principle. In practice, the economy went through the shock of COVID, the war in Ukraine, high inflation, which means that planning and budgeting revenues is especially challenging. So it's not an easy exercise in practice. At the same time, in our own projections a year ago, we were more cautious than the government. We did expect that the deficit was not going to come down as much as the government expected. We expected the deficit this year to be at 5.1% of GDP, which suggests that even though we were more cautious than the government, we were ourselves also still too optimistic.
A year from now, we'll probably meet again and have this discussion again. What do you see accomplished until then?
At that time, I would hope to see that the fiscal package is implemented and is working, that the deficit is on a downward path. I would hope to see that inflation continues to come down as we expect with the prudent policies of the National Bank of Romania. I would hope to see that the next disbursement under the National Recovery and Resilience Plan is moving forward. And with those achievements, I think we will have a pleasant discussion in 1 year.
In this optimistic note, thank you for this interview.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you.